Hello students, today we are going to do An Angel in Disguise by T.S. Arthur. This is T.S. Arthur. T.S. Arthur was a famous 19th century American writer born in 6th June 1809. He was the editor and author of fiction and non-fiction works such as 10 Nights in a Bar Room. 10 Nights was the biggest and most successful of Arthur's career, but equally he was great editor and publisher. His full name was Timothy Shea Arthur. He was weak in health since childhood. Therefore, his mother took up the job of a teacher so that she could read him the Bible stories and tell them the many tales of a father who was an officer in the Revolutionary War. He became a well-known writer on morals, advice, suggestions, compassion, values, and ideas. He died in the year 1885. Children, you can look into your book on page number 76. It's given there. T.S. Arthur was a popular 19th century American writer. His stories, written with compassion and sensitivity, articulate and spread values and ideas that were associated with respected middle-class life in America. So he usually talked about the middle-class people. In his story, An Angel in Disguise, T.S. Arthur describes the transformative and restorative power of selfless love. That is true. Maggie, you are going to see that she had the selfless love, and because of her there were so many changes in the Thompson family. It relates to the advent of Maggie. Advent means arrival. A frail young orphan into the lives of wheelwright Joe Thompson and his vinegar-tempered wife Jane. Now, who was a wheelwright? A wheelwright is a person whose job is making and repairing wheels. And his wife, Jane, was vinegar-tempered. That means ill-tempered. She was ill-tempered. And the miraculous effect that the child's presence has on the woman's character and the happiness that she brings to her adopted family. So let us start the chapter An Angel in Disguise. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. Idleness is laziness. Vice is immoral or wicked behavior. Intemperance means excessive indulgence in alcohol. So she used to consume a lot of alcohol, and she was very lazy. She used to do no work. And immoral and wicked behavior. That was the reason for her death. So she was lying where all her children was present. She had fallen uphold the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit. Now she had consumed a lot of alcohol, and due to that she had fallen on the threshold and died, and she even died in the presence of her frightened little ones. Obviously her children would have been really frightened seeing the only person who was supporting their family dead in front of them. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. That means that men and women are like flowers, and when that death touches them, they wither. This woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. Despised means disliked. Scoffed at means mocked at. Means everybody used to laugh at her. And angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. Denounced means she was disliked by them. Because of her behavior, they did not like her. First of all, she was very lazy. Second reason, her behavior was wicked. And the third thing is she used to drink a lot, that is alcohol. That was the cause of her death. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip in subdued tones, so people were, passing on the message that she is dead. Subdued tones. Subdued tone means they were just trying to tell one person to another. And these things you cannot shout and tell. It has to be said in a low voice. Pity took the place of anger. That means those people who were angry with her now had pity in their hearts because she was no more, she was dead. And sorrow of denunciation. That means because they were feeling bad because they had criticized her. Denunciation means criticism. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble-down hut in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. So where she was staying in a old tumble-down hut. That means it could, come down any moment. So these neighbors went to her hut rather, hastily, in which she secured a little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. So it was, barely taking care of them. Just a little small hut it was, and that saved them from the summer heat and winter cold. Some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body. So some of the neighbors took clothes that were going to be used to cover up the dead body. Interment means burial of the body. And some with food for the half-starving children. So they had not eaten properly. So these children were starving. 3 in number. That means there were 3 children. Of these, John, the oldest, a boy of 12. So John was the oldest boy and he was 12-year-old. Was a stout lad, able to earn. So he was a fat and a heavy-built lad. Lad is a young boy. Able to learn his living with any farmer. So he could go to a farm and he could work over there. So he could help the farmer to earn a living. Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright, active girl, out of whom something clever might be made if in good hands. So if Kate would have gone to good hands, definitely she would have done very well in her life. And she was between 10 and 11 years old. She was very bright, active girl. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly diseased. Now what do you mean by hopelessly diseased? She had a disease which was hopeless. There was no hope for it. She could not be cured. Now let us see what had happened to her. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine, and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So she, had injured her spine, and due to that, she could not even leave her bed. So the only way she could leave her bed was in her mother's arm. And her mother was dead. There was no one to take care of her. She was handicapped. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. So that was the chief question of all the villagers. That what should we do with the children? Because the mother is gone and they didn't have the father before itself. The dead mother would go underground. That means she would be buried and be forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. Now she doesn't have to care of anyone. Why? Because she's dead now and she's going to be buried. So she's far away from all these worries. But the children must not be left to starve. Obviously, how can they leave all the villagers? How can they leave the children alone? And if they leave them alone, they'll starve and they'll die. After considering the matter and taking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John because he knew, that John would definitely help him in the farm. So he took John with him. The farmer Jones took John with him. and do well by him, now that his mother was out of the way, and Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice of Katy, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. So, mother was out of the way means it is only the parents that actually protect you and care for you from from the world, the big bad world. They save you from that. So now the father was already gone, mother also was dead, so there was no one in the way. They could exploit them, use them the way they want. Okay, you should always be grateful to God that you have got parents who are taking care of you. Otherwise, it's a big bad world, and everybody would like to use you the way they want to. Even Mrs. Ellis, she was taking away Katy, though she knew very well for few years she would not be able to work for her. So she was taking her so that she could use her after few years, because she was too young at this time. I could do much better, I know. So she is pretending that I could do better without Katy. But as no one seems inclined to take her, so she's showing off here that nobody wants to take her. I'm just doing her something good. I might act from a sense of duty, expect to have trouble with the child. She's saying I definitely will have trouble bringing up this child, for she's an undisciplined thing, used to having her own way. So she's saying that she is not disciplined and she has to teach her discipline. Of course, small children are like that. They want things to be done their way, isn't it? But no one said, I will take Maggie. Now, why they didn't want to take Maggie? Because she was handicapped. Pitying glances were cast on her wan and wasted form. Wan means pale looks. So people were looking at her pale looks, wasted forms, and thoughts were troubled on her account. So they did not want to take her. They were they thinking about taking her. Their thoughts were troubled. They did not want to do something like that. Mothers brought cast off garments and removing her soiled and ragged clothes. Now she was not able to move about. Even if she has to go to the washroom, her mother had to help her. Since her mother was dead, there was no one to take her, and because of that, her clothes were soiled. So there were women who came with clean clothes, clean attire, and dressed her up. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts. So she had sad eyes, and patiently she was waiting for someone to say at least yes to her, and even knocked at them for entrance. The way she was looking at them, she was like, please take me. That was the kind of looks she was giving to the others, but none opened to take her in. Nobody was ready to take her. Who wanted a bedridden child? So nobody wanted to take care of a child who was bedridden. Take her to the poorhouse, said a rough man, of whom the question, what's to be done with Maggie, was asked. Nobody is going to be bothered with her. So what they decided was to take her to a poor house. Now what is a poor house? It is a building in which extremely poor people could live and be fed. So he says nobody is going to be bothered about her, take care of her, because too much of attention had to be given to her if somebody plans to take her. The poorhouse is a sad place for a sick and helpless child, answered one. So one of them, he said that it's not a very good place. It's a very sad place for someone who's sick and helpless. For your child or mine, said the other, lightly speaking, but for this brat, it will prove a blessed change. So one of them answers, it might be a bad place for your child or my child, but it will be good for this brat. Now, brat actually is a child who misbehaves. So he says that he means that it might be bad for our children, but for her, it will be a blessed change. It will be a blessing for her. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctor, which is more than can be said of her past condition. So they thought in the past she was not taken care of, she was not doctored, she could not go visit to a doctor, and she did not have healthy food, and she was not kept clean. So they said if she goes to the poorhouse, all these problems would be taken care of. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. Yes, there was a reason that she would be taken care of, but it was not a very satisfactory answer that he gave. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. So the following day, it was the day of burial. A few neighbors went at the miserable hovel. A hovel is a small miserable dwelling. But none followed dead cart, as it bore the unhonored remains to its pauper grave. So few of the neighbors came, but they did not follow the cart. Now, if it would have been the cart of a rich person, then everybody would have followed it. But it carried the remains of a poor person. So nobody was interested in following it. Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away. Now, after the coffin was taken out of his cart, he just took John and he drove away from there. Satisfied that he had done his part. He is satisfied he has done a good job right now. He's done a charity. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air. Even she wanted to just hurry up from there. She did not want to be there. Bid your sister goodbye and drew the tearful children apart ere means before. Scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. So they were just not able to even kiss each other. And before that only she took. Now there's a mistake of the spelling. Bye. Hastily, others went out, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look. Refraining is not trying to look that way until all had gone. So some of them were looking at her and some of them were not to look at her. They did not want, because they did not want to take Maggie with them. She was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest. So the last person who was left there was Joe Thompson, and the second last person who was left there was blacksmith's wife. Even she was trying to run away from there. It's a cruel thing to leave her so. So what did he say? Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, he said it's very cruel to leave her in this way. Then take her to the poorhouse. She will have to go there, answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. Now she just answered this, okay, you take her to the poorhouse, and after that she ran away from there. She did not want to take any responsibility of Maggie. For a little while the man stood with a puzzled air. He did not know what to do. That's the reason he was, it's written here, with a puzzled air. Then he turned back. He decided something and he turned around and went into the hovel again. Hovel is the dwelling. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed. Now she could not get up on her own. But the very thought of being left alone, she had gathered some courage and she was sitting upright position on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. So she was going on looking at the door. Will someone come back to help her, to take care of her? A vague terror had come into her thin white face. So she was terrified at that time. That, will I be left alone? Will nobody take me? And due to that, her face had gone white, pale. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," she cried out, catching her suspended breath. "Don't leave me here all alone." So she was literally begging Mr. Thompson, not to leave her all alone there. She was very scared. Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. So he was a hearted person. So he liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop, where sleds and wagons were made or mended for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpence. He liked children a lot, and he was very happy when they used to come to his shop. Sledge is a vehicle for conveying loads or passengers over snow or ice by animals. And a wagon is a vehicle used for transporting goods or another specified purpose. Were made or mended. So these two were made or mended for the village lads. Now, village lad are the young boys of village without a draft on their hoarded sixpence. So he used to, these children used to, keep saving money, and then they used to come here for getting it mended. But he used to not take that because he used to love children. "No, dear," he answered in a kind voice. So he answered him, "I'm not going to leave you alone." Going to the bed and stooping down over the child. Stooping is bending low. "You shan't be left here alone." So he told her that he is not going to leave her alone. Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman. Now, gentleness is associated with women. So that's the way he wrapped her, in a gentle manner, how a woman would have done. In a clean bedclothes which some neighbor had brought, and lifting her in his strong arms. So he lifted her in her arms because he did not want to leave her alone. Bore her out into the air and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. So between his home and that hovel where she was staying, there was a field. So he walked through the field carrying her in his arms. Now, Joe Thompson's wife, who happened to be a childless, was not a woman of saintly temper. Now, Joe Thompson did not have a child, and his wife was not of saintly temper. So she did not have patience, not much given to self-denial for others' good. So she did not believe in doing anything, for others' good, that she might not have and do good for others. She did not believe in that. Joe had well-grounded doubts touching the manner of greeting he should receive on his arrival. So, Joe Thompson knew very well about his wife. So he had well-grounded doubts. He had for sure doubts. He was sure about it, that he will not get a good welcome when he reaches home. Mrs. Thompson saw him approaching from the window. So she was already waiting for him to come back, and she was watching through the window, and she saw him approaching, and with ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door. Now she could not wait for him to just enter the door. So she went outside the door and she met him there. She went few steps outside the door, and she met him there. As he opened the garden gate and came in. So he just opened the gate and he was just about to enter the house. He bore a precious burden. The precious burden here is referred to Maggie. Now children, precious burden is an oxymoron used here. That is a literary device used here. Now what is an oxymoron? When there are two different words of the different kind, having the different meaning, like she was precious, okay, that's a positive. Being a burden is something negative, so they have got something opposite nature in them. So when two words of opposite natures are brought together, that's called an oxymoron. Precious burden is an oxymoron. And he felt it to be so. And he felt it to be so, like it, though she was, he was carrying her, it could have been a burden, but it was a precious one. He really liked her. As his arms held the sick child to his breast, a spear of tenderness went out from her and penetrated his feelings. So there was, love coming out of her, and it was penetrating. He was realizing that he was feeling that love for her. A bond had already coated itself around them both, and love was springing into life. So there was a kind of a bond that was developed between both of them, and there was life that was coming out. There was love that was, springing all around. What have you there? Sharply questioned Mrs. Thompson. Now she's asking him straight away, what have you brought there? Joe felt the child start and shrink against him. Now, listening to Mrs. Thompson, until now she was feeling very comfortable in his arms. But just listening to Mrs. Thompson, she started feeling very uncomfortable, and she started shifting in his arms. He did not reply except by a look that was pleading and cautionary, that said, wait a moment for explanation and be gentle. So he did not say these words, he just sent a look, okay? And that is what it was supposed to convey, that wait for the moment and please be gentle. And passing in, carried Maggie to the small chamber on the first floor. So he took her to the first floor, where he laid her on the bed. Then stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with his vinegar-tempered wife in the passageway outside. So he just, laid her on the bed. He came out, he shut the door of that room, and he was standing face to face with his ill-tempered wife. That was the passage outside the room. You haven't brought home that sick brat. Anger and astonishment were in the tones of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Her face was in a flame. Now she was very angry, so she just asked him. She could not stop herself. She asked him straight away. I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard, said Joe. So he did not answer her straight away, but he said it in another way, that she was being very hard. Women are supposed to be soft-hearted, but through these lines, he was trying to convey her that she should be a little soft-hearted and should be a little considerate as to what has happened with that girl. Usually, Joe Thompson got out of his wife's way or kept rigidly silent and non-combative when she fired up on any subject. So usually he did not, retort to whatever she said. He used to always be silent and not try to fight. Or whenever she, tried to say something or she would get angry, he would try to rather change the subject. It was with some surprise, therefore, that she now encountered a firmly set countenance and a resolute pair of eyes. So it was a surprise to her, because this was the first time her husband was speaking to her like that. As he had a firmly set countenance, his facial expressions were firm, because he did not want to change whatever decision he had taken, and resolute pairs of eyes, that also they were determined as to whatever decision he has taken, she has to follow it, that she would be staying for the meantime there. Maggie would be staying with them for the meantime. Women's hearts are not half as hard as men's. So that is what Mrs. Thompson says, that women's heart is not hard as men's heart is. Joe saw by a quick intuition that his resolute bearing had impressed his wife, and he answered quickly. And then he tried to answer her. Children, I will end this video here because it's too big now. So the length is too big now, and I will continue this in the second part. I will make another video for it in the second part. Have a nice day.